Hello, my name is Kamari, and I'll start this off by saying delete all your language learning apps. Okay, don't actually do that. But if you want to become fluent in a language learning apps are definitely not the way. Now, I think we all understand that language learning apps can be helpful for learning some of the basics of a language, but when it comes to fluency, uh, language classes are definitely better because I used to think that language learning apps can help me learn a lot about a language, but after being on Duolingo for over a year now, I can only say and understand a few things in Japanese and Italian. And I'll prove my point by talking about the main purpose of most language learning apps, some of the purposes of language classes, and then I'll talk about how language classes are more effective than language learning apps. Okay. Simon Simon Hill, a senior writer at the Wired newsletter, and has been testing and writing about technology for over 15 years now, wrote an article titled Our Favorite Language Learning Apps and a Pocket Translator. And basically, what he talks about in this article is some of the biggest language learning apps and what they can offer, how much they cost, like if they're free or not. The apps he talks about are Babbel, Duolingo, Memrise, Busuu, Lingoto, and Drops. And a quote I have from the article is language learning apps can be an effective tool for improving your language skills, but if you want to become fluent, you will likely need additional help. Now, what he means by this is that language learning apps can be helpful for learning the basics, like I said, but when it comes to going further in a language or becoming fluent, you'll likely need more help. And what I think he's implying here is you should probably take a language class, an actual language class, or maybe get a tutor who can help you learn the language. Okay, now we know the main purpose of most language learning apps. Let's talk about the main purposes of language classes. The second article I have is by Lupa Tuartini and Ida Au Puspita Padnia Hapsari Oka. They're both researchers at Ganesha University of Education and have been teaching English as a foreign language for several years. The article they wrote was The Purpose of Use Classroom Language. And a quote, and sorry, basically what this article is about is the research they've both done on a classroom that was learning English as a foreign language. And they basically talk about some of the things the instructor used to help their students learn effectively. Some quotes I have from the article are, quote, three purposes of classroom language use: motivating, instructing, and guiding, end quote. And that, quote, the classroom language indirectly gives the teacher a duty to guide students in using English naturally, end quote. Now, what they mean by saying this is that the teacher of a learning class usually tries to teach students in a very effective way by having three or four purposes in the way they teach. So the students aren't just mindlessly looking at their teacher just speak. They're trying to incorporate ways for them to learn more effectively. All right, now we know the main purposes of language learning apps and language classes. Let's compare how language classes are more effective than language learning apps. The first reason I have is that the pace of learning. In language classes, the pace is usually set by an instructor. So the instructor usually knows how fast you need to go, like how much you need to learn in the amount of a lot of time you have for the course. But for language learning apps, the pace is usually set by the person who downloaded the app. So the person who downloaded it usually doesn't learn a lot. They usually quit after like a month or two. So I don't know. They usually just don't last that long on the language learning app because they're like, I'm not really learning a lot on this app anyway. I'm just doing the same things over and over again. It's getting boring. And The second reason why language classes are more effective is the assistance they get. Language classes, they obviously have an instructor, but the instructor is super useful because you can ask questions. Like, you can just raise your hand like this, or if the teacher isn't taking questions during class, you can just come after class or during office hours, maybe even email them. For the most part, the instructor is going to help you if you ask. But for language learning apps, you get barely any assistance. They'll teach you it and then give you some lessons on it, but if you just get the answer wrong 2 or 3 times, they'll give you the answer and they'll just expect you to learn over time while providing minimal help. The third reason why language classes are more effective is the motivation. Now, the main motivation I'm thinking is money because usually language classes cost a lot of money to take. So the person taking the language class will try their best to learn and pass the class because if they don't, it's just a waste of time and money. But for language learning apps, they don't really have that motivation because usually the language app is free or it's $8 to $15 a month or something like that. So someone using language learning app might think, oh, whatever, I don't need to keep doing this. I'm getting bored of it anyway. I'll just delete it. It doesn't matter. I'm barely paying any money per month. The fourth and final reason why language classes are more effective, well, at least what I can think of, is the variety of methods of learning. Language classes, if it's a good instructor, will try to change it up every now and again. Maybe like every other class, they'll teach in different ways, different activities, maybe collaborate more. But for language learning apps, it's structured almost the exact same. Maybe every like now and again, it'll structure the lesson differently, but for the most part, you're just doing the same thing over and over and over again. So, to conclude, I hope you can see why language classes are way more effective for learning compared to language learning apps. And to recap, first we talked about the main purpose of most of the biggest language learning apps. Then we talked about the purposes of language classes. And then we talked about how language classes are more effective than language learning apps. So overall, language classes, language learning apps can be helpful for learning the basics. But when it comes to fluency and becoming fluent in a language, I feel like language classes are way better. Thank you.